I used to think silence was the softest kind of love. The kind that sets the table before dawn and irons the shirt without being asked and sends money with the message left blank. But quiet can be a box if you let someone else put the lid on. I learned that on the night my son married a woman who smiled like glass, transparent and sharp, and set my name aside like a napkin that didn't match her silverware. I learned it in a room that smelled like bleach and hot dust. A room with folding chairs and a mop bucket where they seated me as if I were a delivery no one signed for. And I learned it with a small brass key warm in my palm. The same key I carried through 2 presidents, 3 apartments, and the long slow fall of my husband's absence. You can forgive a lot in the name of love, but not erasure. Not the kind that writes you out while you're still breathing. Tyrone came late. Not into this world. He was punctual about being born. 3 hours of labor. A rush of rain at the hospital window like the city applauded, but late to the discipline of love. His father left when Tyrone was 8, and suddenly it was me and the boy and a paycheck that could only stretch if I pulled it with my teeth. I worked doubles in cafeterias, nights in medical records, weekends washing church tablecloths until the bleach turned my knuckles into peeled moons. I taught my son to tie his shoes and my tongue. You speak with respect. I'd tell him. You pass the salt with both hands. You walk your grandmother to the car even if she's only going to put her purse in it. Somewhere along the line he learned gentleness. The way some boys learned football, practiced it, wore it, used it as proof. He also learned comfort. Comfort can be cruel in the wrong hands. Sierra had a clever way of talking. Each sentence held a bouquet of reassurances with a thorn threaded through. We want a clean look, she told me early on, the kind of wedding that reads modern. No sequins, no bright colors. She said it like the sun was a mistake that could be corrected with ivory napkins. I said, okay. I wore beige and a demure smile and left my red lipstick on the dresser next to the picture of my mother. Who would have worn it anyway? When my son told his fiancée that I'd help with a few things, she heard it as a pledge to lift the whole day with my back. I didn't correct either of them. I made calls, paid deposits, spoke softly to people who call you ma'am only because they can't remember your name. The florist knew my voice. The DJ did too. He's my niece's boy. The venue, Sierra loved it on site. The 4 rustic barn with fairy lights and glossy wooden doors that look like they've forgiven 100 storm seasons. People call it Langston Hill, like it's an estate. It used to be Ray's feed supply. I knew Ray. We drank instant coffee on that same square of concrete when the roof leaked. And his daughter cried because the money wouldn't stretch. After Ray passed, I bought the building with my first brave check from retirement, painted the beams, laid brick by brick like rosary beads, each one an apology to the future I was making. Kept the name, let everyone think it was some old noble hill instead of a decent man's last name polished into respectability. Look at God, he repurposes. I paid in full and said nothing. That was my habit. I don't like debts that live between people like a thin mean dog. I don't like gratitude that turns into a leash. I don't need praise to do right. I wanted my son to have a day with no calculator in his pocket, no mental ledger. I wanted him to lean back, exhale, and forget that boys from our side of the neighborhood are taught to hold their joy in their fists like contraband. So I took the invoices and set them on my chest like warm bread. Every time Sierra's emails reached Tyrone, they slid to me as smoothly as oil toward flame. The afternoon of the wedding, I handed my keys to a valet who said thank you, ma'am, without looking at my face. It didn't hurt then. The hurt came later, when I stood in front of a chalkboard that looked like a menu and read 100 names written in the careful penmanship of someone who has never memorized a rent date. I looked once, twice. I know my name. I know all the ways people have misspelled it. None of them were there. I thought maybe they put mother of the groom instead. The way some folks try to turn your role into your identity. No. I scanned card after card. My hands didn't shake. My hands don't tremble when I am insulted. My hands go quiet. A young man with ears like parentheses balanced a tray of champagne and told me they were keeping things orderly. He led me past the main hall, down a narrow corridor that smelled like the breath of an old air conditioner, and into a storage room scrubbed into disguise. A bouquet leaned sideways in a chipped vase. Costco cookies sagged into a polite little tower. There was a pitcher of water that tasted like the inside of a plastic hose, and a folding chair. My place. The DJ announced the wedding party through the wall. I dabbed the corner of my eye, not because it surprised me, because it didn't. I could trace the line from Sierra's clipped comments to this room like a seam on a dress. I heard them as they were spoken. We want a refined palate. We're going with a celebration dinner instead of a reception. We need a dove coordinator so things don't get chaotic. The good china stayed on my shelf. The soul food supper stayed in my head. I pressed the napkin to my mouth and tasted mascara. Then I slid my fingers into my clutch and held the key that's kept every door I've ever labored over from forgetting me. It's a small thing, brass warmed by 1,000 pockets. I rubbed it with my thumb like a worry stone. Let them have their glitter. Let them speak into microphones and call it forever. I am not a woman who drags a storm into a party. I let a storm arrive on time. Maya found me. That girl is a ledger that balances itself. She was born looking like she'd read the fine print. She came into that sad little room in a dress that moved like a bell and sat down beside me without asking permission from the air. "Grandma," she said, "they're doing photos. They didn't call you." That sentence carried a lifetime of swallowed thunder. I told her I was fine. It was a lie so small, it barely counted as one. She noticed the key and didn't ask dumb questions. "You own this place, don't you?" I kissed my teeth and smiled without showing them. "I own what I built," I said, which is not the same as everyone knowing it. She's the one who asked if I was going to do something, not like a challenge, like an invitation. "Not yet," I told her. There is a rightness to timing that feels like the exact center of a song. The one beat where every absence becomes arrangement. I have lived long enough to locate that beat with my eyes closed. The first dances are for fairy tales. The toasts are for older liars. Around 7, they moved to speeches. I stood not in the room but next to it, looking through the glass with the patience of a tide. Sierra's dress held the light hostage. Her smile didn't reach her eyes because she had put those eyes to work, counting praise. Tyrone's laugh had my daddy's echo. He looked good. He looked happy enough to ignore me. And maybe he hadn't checked the seating chart. Maybe he was busy with a cufflink. Maybe 100 maybes piled up like chairs in a hall. A maybe is not a shelter. It's a tarp that flaps in wind. I called Mr. Benton. A good man. Wears his tie like a promise and keeps both. We'd been dancing around a closing date like two old folks flirting at the fish fry. I'd asked him to hold until after the wedding, because I believed in leaving certain illusions intact long enough to say goodbye. "It's Dorothy," I said. "Go ahead." He didn't ask why. He knew the math of my patience. He said it would be recorded within the hour. I put my phone back in my purse and felt myself cool. The way a burned skillet goes from roar to listen. There are angers that set you on fire and angers that pull you out of it. This one was water. Clear. Cold. Clean. Victor stood near the back corridor like a sentinel carved out of practical kindness. He has worked for me for a decade, keeping the house lights of other people's joy from flickering. I nodded. He nodded back. Went down the hall with his clipboard like a man going to fix a pipe. I slipped outside to let the night lay its hand on me. The cicadas were tuned to summer. Somewhere behind the hedges, someone was breaking in new heels with quiet curses. I sat at a patio table and watched the square of light the French doors made on the stone. I didn't have to wait long. Confusion arrives like a fog, soft at first, then suddenly there's no road. Bars closed. Bathrooms locked. The DJ's voice thinned with uncertainty. Sierra approached Victor with a smile pulled tight like a drum. He took her outside. I watched them from a bench, like a parishioner who knows when to stand. "There has been a transfer," he said, and the sentence fell like a gavel, even without a courtroom. "Legal turnover finalized 15 minutes ago, per clause 14B of the rental agreement. Tonight's event ends now." She said the words people say when they built their lives on air. "What? How? Who?" He pointed. I didn't rise. I let my sitting become the tallest thing there. Tyrone appeared like a boy woken up. Sierra's mother stormed into the frame, dialing a number the law didn't care about. The staff moved quietly, like people who understand that ending things can be as gentle as starting them if you're practiced. The DJ's last note died like a fly against a window. "You sold the venue," Tyrone said, half question, half accusation, as if selling what you own were a kind of crime. I corrected him without raising my voice. "I sold my building. After you sat me in its garage." The word "my" echoed. It changed the architecture of the air. People started whispering. A child cried because children know when the grown-ups have broken something. Sierra said I ruined her wedding. I told her she misaddressed the blame. Invitations have a way of revealing themselves. Who is written in the hand and who is scribbled an afterthought. I didn't ruin the wedding. I ended a performance. I left them standing in a story that had suddenly remembered it belonged to me. I walked away because staying would have turned the truth into theater. And I didn't owe those folks a standing ovation. Victor found me by the roses with a manila folder and a set of keys I no longer needed. "The deposit cleared," he said. The stamp was still damp on the paper. Freedom doesn't always arrive as a cheer. Sometimes it's a paper that says your name and the exact number of square feet that are yours no more. Freeing a thing you built can feel like cutting a stubborn knot. It can feel like taking off shoes you have long convinced yourself were your size. Maya came with cake. 2 slices on paper plates, like communion but with sugar. Figured no one brought you any. She said. No one had. The cake was almond-scented and trying too hard. Still, I ate it with the appetite of a woman who paid every bill for a night and then repossessed the moon above it. They say this will go viral, Maya added, eyes on her phone. It did. The world loves a parable with receipts. They love a woman who ends a dance with a deed instead of a tantrum. They love the neatness of a sentence like bride evicted by groom's mom, though the truth was better. Landlord cancelled extension on a rental no one respected. And the landlord was the invisible woman in beige. That night I slept with my window open. The fan hummed. My bones lay down like honest workers. No one called. I took it as proof of how they had grown used to my silence. Silence has 2 faces. One is surrender. The other is a blade. In the morning I made coffee and opened my tablet. The internet was doing what it always does, turning the ache of strangers into theater. They called me savage, petty, queen. There were jokes and messy edits and a soundtrack that made a prayer out of a choreography of paperwork. Hidden among all that noise were messages from women with hands like mine. They wrote of hospitals and guest lists and locked doors. They wrote of children who organized their mothers like closets. One said, "They think we will not be the weather. We are the weather." I put the tablet face down and held my cup with both hands until the warmth reached my wrists. At noon, my son knocked. He looked like a man who had wrung himself out and found lint. I let him in because I am not made of public moments. I am made of private ones. He sat on my couch and studied a photograph like it had a language he wanted to learn. "I didn't know they sat you there," he said. The lie or the omission hanging between us like a bad light fixture. I asked him if he looked for me. At the reception. During the photos. While the speeches poured out their shiny syrup. He said no to each and lowered his eyes in time. We were talking like 2 people who have just found out the house was built over a sinkhole. "There's a difference between peace and surrender," I told him. "You gave her peace and handed me surrender." He started to cry in the way men do when their ribs finally admit what their mouths refuse. They shake like the good wall clock in an earthquake. I didn't hold him. I handed him an envelope with every receipt, not because I wanted the money back, because I wanted the story to be obliged to the facts again. Then I handed him another envelope with my lawyer's new will. A recalibration, not a cancellation. If you treat the woman who built the table like a chair that can be folded, do not be surprised when the table moves houses. "You gave everything," he said. "I did," I responded. "That does not entitle you to the right to take anything. Love must not train you into theft." He nodded like one of those plastic birds that dip its beak into water forever. "Can I still visit?" he asked. "Yes," I said, "but you will have to look me in the face while you do." He left. I watched him get smaller through my window, and for the first time since the storage room, I let myself cry in the honest way, with my mouth open and my hands on my knees. Then I washed my face and ate leftover chicken straight from the refrigerator because living is an action. We have to keep choosing. Respect returned to me with interest. The city's tone changed. The aunties who used to preface my name with "Girl, stop," started calling me Ms. Holloway with a pause before the last syllable. Like my name was a porch they ought to wipe their feet on. The church deacon asked me to pray over the offering again. And the men at the hardware store carried out my bags without trying to explain a Phillips head to me. I didn't need any of it, but I noticed, people learn fast when a window breaks. Next time, we will pull down the shade slowly. I sold the venue because sometimes the sweetest revenge is to take your labor out of the room and give it to your own future. The woman who bought it called me twice to thank me for keeping the gutters clear, for having the permits in order, for leaving a note on the breaker box shaped like a blessing. I could hear her voice widen into plans. I told her to plant rosemary by the back door. Brides forget to eat and rosemary smells like memory. We hung up smiling. As for the newlyweds, every storm tests what's nailed down. I kept my distance. If my son needed a place to stand, he knew where to knock. He knocked sometimes. He brought casseroles he didn't cook. He sat quiet. He left quiet. The wound scabbed into something sturdier than pride. Boundary. Maya didn't wait. She had a laptop and a righteous glint and a notebook with squares she liked to fill. She said, "Grandma, we should make space for women like you. Not a pity club. A strategy room." She named it before I could argue. The Evermothers Fund. A place where matriarchs displaced from their own ceremonies could come to tuck their chins and roll up their sleeves and leave with papers that fit. We rented a small office above a laundromat that smelled like steam and bravery. We opened the blinds. I brought a coffee maker. Women came. They came with stories that bled through their coats. We sat in a circle and didn't bow our heads unless we were praying. We outlined our names on paper and dared the world to trace outside the lines. When they finished, I handed them what I wish someone had given me the first day I felt the world lean too hard on my shoulders. A list of rights written in plain language and a pen that worked. We talked about deeds and cosigners and how kindness gets used like a crowbar if you hold it wrong. We practiced saying, "No, I will not move out of my kitchen while you choose a paint color for the island." We rehearsed family is not a lever. We wrote down lawyer numbers. We laughed. Sometimes, we cried. One woman poured out a bag of guest favors still tied with ribbon and said, "I stole these on my way out because I paid for them." We ate the almonds and called it restitution with a grin. The internet eventually forgets. It has too. It feeds on fresh. The clip that made me a sermon got buried under newer outrages, and I was glad to see it go. Fame is the loudest form of being misunderstood. I stayed busy. I learned to rest without the soft apology of housework. I planted tomatoes and watched them turn from hard green anxieties into glossy red certainty. I mended my mama's quilt where the cotton had thinned into suggestion. I forgave myself for staying quiet as long as I did. Forgiveness for others is a different ledger. Some debts are redeemed by time, others remain instructional. On a Wednesday, I found a single hydrangea bloom on my stoop with a note, "I'm learning." It was from my son. No signature, but I know his handwriting. I know how his letters lean right, like they're late. I put the flower in a pickle jar and gave it water. I wrote back nothing. That was my response. Let the thing live or don't, but I won't hover. I still carry the key, not because it opens anything now, because it reminds me that ownership is not only a document, it is a posture. It is the angle of a chin and the soft way a door closes when you've decided to stop apologizing for the space you take. Some nights I sit at my kitchen table with the window cracked and the streetlight painting a coin of yellow on the floor, and I say my life back to myself like a psalm. I worked. I loved. I paid. I lost. I learned. I repossessed my name and hung it over the doorway where nobody could miss it on their way in. If you want the moral, here it is, whispered so it sticks. They will ask you to compress yourself. Don't do it. They will set your chair behind a wall and call it order. Move the wall. Or sell the building. Or invite the wall to learn your name. Whatever you build with your two hands is yours to move, protect, or burn as you see fit. And anyone who calls you destructive for guarding your fire was never warmed by it. When I close my eyes, I still see light brimming on those rented glasses, that chandelier made to look like frost. But what I hear isn't the song they danced to. It's the slow click of my heels on stone as I walked away. It's the clean rip of tape as Victor sealed a box. It's the hush when truth enters a room and sits down at the head of the table. And somewhere behind those sounds, so soft I almost miss it, I hear my mother's voice. The one that taught me to pray and to press a hem without scalding my fingers. She says, "Baby, let the river carry what ain't anchored. Keep your own boat righted." And I do. I do. I do. I sat in that garage, a quiet smile tracing my lips as the voices of the wedding party echoed through the walls. I should have been there, shouldn't I? Seated at the front, among the warmth and laughter, basking in the glow of my son's biggest day. Instead, here I was alone in the cold, surrounded by empty chairs and forgotten decorations. How had it come to this? How had my own blood, my own son, let his bride erase me from this moment? From his life, it seemed. I was nothing more than a footnote now, an inconvenience to be tucked away where no one could see me. They didn't even have the decency to offer me a seat with the rest of the family. No, they'd parked me in a dark corner, behind a mop bucket. As if I were some unwanted guest at my own son's wedding. I laughed softly to myself. No one knew the weight of my sacrifice. I had raised him alone, with barely a penny to my name. I scrubbed floors, worked overtime in the kitchen, all so he could have a better life than I did. And now, on the day that should have celebrated our family, I was hidden in the shadows. The DJ's voice floated through the walls. Bright and cheerful, oblivious to the storm brewing just beyond his reach. I didn't cry. There was no need. The tears had dried up long ago. Instead, I sat quietly, my hands folded in my lap, the brass key pressed firmly between my fingers. A key I had carried for over 20 years. The original key, the one that opened the doors to the place I had built with my own two hands. The place that was now a spectacle for everyone except me. But they didn't know what I knew. They didn't know who they were dealing with. The thought that I had built this place, that I owned it, but never told a soul. It gave me strength. I wasn't angry, not anymore. I wasn't even hurt. I had made peace with it long ago, and when the time was right, they would learn exactly who they were disrespecting. A soft knock at the door broke my reverie. My granddaughter, Maya, stepped inside, her face twisted in concern. "Grandma, are you okay?" she asked softly, her voice trembling. I looked up at her, my heart aching with both pride and sorrow. Maya, my bright, sharp granddaughter, was too smart for her own good. She could see through the act I was putting on, the calm that hid the storm beneath. She knew what had happened, what was happening, and I could see the weight of it in her eyes. "They didn't call you for the photos, Grandma. Did you know that?" Maya said gently. "They don't even know what they're doing to you." Her words hit me like a slap in the face. I didn't say anything. What was there to say? I'd known from the very beginning. From the moment Sierra had insisted on managing the guest list, to the moment she'd decided to seat me in the garage. I knew exactly how this would unfold, but I had let it happen. I had chosen silence over confrontation. "Don't worry about me, baby," I said, forcing a smile. "Let them have their day. Let them dance. Let them laugh. It'll be over soon enough." Maya sat beside me, her arms folded across her chest. She wasn't convinced. She had always been the one who saw through my walls, who saw through my silence. And as much as I wanted to protect her from this, I knew single quotes. After a while, I stood. I didn't look back at the garage, didn't glance at the empty chairs or the dull wilted flowers. I knew where my place was. I knew what I had to do. I made my way to the main hall, the crowd oblivious to my presence. I didn't want to be seen, not yet. I stood near the side entrance, watching through the French doors. There they were, my son, Tyrone, and Sierra, seated at the sweetheart table, looking so happy, so in love. It hurt, but not in the way it used to. I had learned to let go. I wasn't going to fight for their affection anymore. I wasn't going to beg for a seat at their table. And then, I made the call. The one that would change everything. It was time to close the deal. Time to take back what was mine. As I stood by the side door, watching them from the shadows, I felt something inside me settle. A quiet peace. The kind you get when you finally accept what's been true all along, even if it's hard to admit. I wasn't a victim. Not anymore. I had spent too many years playing small, walking quietly behind others, pretending that it didn't hurt when they dismissed me, when they ignored the sacrifices I made. But this wasn't about them. It was about me, and I had waited long enough to make it right. The music pulsed through the walls of the building, the guests swaying to the beat, lost in their own world of happiness. But I stood still, my heart beating steady in my chest, calm. I didn't need the cheers or the applause. I didn't need them to acknowledge me anymore. I had already earned my place in this world, and they were about to learn that. I stepped into the cool evening air. The soft murmur of the wedding still behind me, muffled through the walls. I could hear the cicadas singing in the trees, the summer night still clinging to the air. I sat at an empty patio table, far from the crowd, away from the spectacle they'd created. There, I took a long sip from my water bottle, the cool liquid washing over my throat, and I waited. Time pass slowly. I watched the guests shuffle around, some still laughing, others frowning in confusion. The drinks were drying up, the last few guests lingering near the bathrooms, trying to figure out what was going wrong, and then, the announcement came. The DJ's voice crackled through the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, can I get your attention? Please, we're moving to the cake cutting and reception closing speech." I smiled to myself, a small, quiet smile that only I knew the meaning of. The timing was perfect. I stood up, smoothed down the beige dress Sierra had insisted I wear, and walked back toward the reception hall. My feet moved with purpose, steady and sure. This wasn't just any moment. This was mine, and I had waited long enough to take it back. I stood by the French doors, watching them all inside. The sweetheart table, the laughter, the speeches, it all seemed so far removed from me. So foreign, like a dream I had no part in. There they were, Tyrone and Sierra, glowing with the light of the evening. Their world seemed so complete, so perfect. But I knew the truth. The house they were standing in, the venue they had claimed as their own, it wasn't theirs. It was mine. They just didn't know it yet. I took a deep breath and called Mr. Benton, the real estate broker I'd been working with for the past year. The transaction had been set in motion months ago, and tonight, everything was ready to go. The wedding was nothing more than a small chapter in a much bigger story. "Dorothy," he answered, his voice calm as always. "It's done. The paperwork's final, and the property transfer is official. The buyer's all set." I didn't feel anything in that moment. Not relief, not anger, not joy. Just clarity. Go ahead and finalize it, I said simply. It's done. I ended the call and slipped my phone back into my purse. I didn't need to explain myself to anyone. Not anymore. They had made their bed, and I was about to watch them lie in it. The music continued inside, rising and falling with the chatter of people who didn't know they were standing on borrowed ground. Not long after, I saw him. Victor, the venue manager who had worked with me since Langston Hill was just an empty shell. He was standing near the back hallway, looking around, clipboard in hand. I gave him a nod, a signal that it was time. He disappeared down the corridor, and I followed him outside, through the quiet garden, past the faded flowers and chipped stones. I'm sorry, ma'am, Victor said when we reached the side doors. There's been a transfer of property. The wedding's over, per clause 14B of the rental agreement. Sierra's expression shifted from joy to confusion in an instant. She rushed out, furious. What do you mean? What is this about? Victor smiled, calm as ever. The original owner sold the property. It's been finalized. Her eyes widened. Who sold it? Victor turned to me, his gaze unwavering. She did. And just like that, everything changed. The silence that fell between us was deafening. The music cut off, and guests began to shuffle toward the doors, unsure of what was happening. The DJ, confused, paused the drinks stopped flowing. The laughter faded, and in that moment, I stood tall. I had done it. I had taken back what was mine. Sierra's face crumpled as she turned to me, her mouth trembling. You ruined our wedding, she hissed, her voice cracking with frustration and disbelief. I looked at her, calm as a lake in winter. No, I said softly, you ruined the invitation. The wedding was just the invoice. I stood my ground, not even glancing back as I walked away from her. The night air had cooled, and I felt the weight of everything settle on me. Every moment, every struggle, every tear shed had led to this. I wasn't just a guest at their wedding, I was the one who built the ground they were standing on. Tyrone didn't come after me. He stood frozen, staring at me with eyes full of confusion and regret. He had no words left. Sierra's mother came rushing out next, dialing someone on her phone, no doubt to make things right in her own mind. But no one was going to fix this. Not anymore. Victor, who had always been respectful, calmly informed her that legal enforcement would soon follow if the property wasn't vacated. He handed her a printed document, signed and stamped, everything in perfect order. The guests, confused, started to leave. Some whispered amongst themselves, others filmed the scene on their phones. The music had stopped, and the atmosphere was shifting from celebration to chaos. I watched it all from the side, invisible, just like they wanted me to be. But not anymore. I made my way down the gravel path, my heels clicking against the stones, steady and unhurried. The sounds of voices faded behind me. I wasn't going to rush. I wasn't going to let them see me flinch. They thought they were in control, but I was the one who had built everything they were standing on. Maya found me sitting on a bench near the rose bushes. Calm and composed, she approached, carrying 2 slices of cake on paper plates. She handed me one, her expression soft with understanding. Figured you didn't get one, she said gently. I smiled faintly, taking the cake from her. I didn't, but I got the building. We both laughed quietly, the sound sharp in the otherwise still air. She sat next to me, and we watched as the last of the guests filtered out. The confusion lingered, but no one dared approach me. Maya, I said, my voice steady, do you think he really didn't know? Maya shrugged, her gaze flickering between the scene before us and the quiet resolve in my eyes. He knew, he just didn't want to see it. I nodded slowly, taking in her words. He wanted peace more than respect. Maya's eyes softened. You taught him grace, but Sierra taught him silence. The truth of it settled between us like a heavy weight. I had raised him, loved him, built everything I could for him, and yet he had let her erase me. The night stretched on. The parking lot began to empty. I watched Tyrone standing alone near the fountain, his shoulders slumped, looking more lost than I'd ever seen him. He saw me, but he didn't approach. He didn't have the words. Sierra stormed out next, her heels clacking on the pavement as she kicked a flower arrangement off its pedestal. Her makeup was streaked, her face flushed with rage. The bride, reduced to nothing more than a tantrum. Victor reappeared, as composed as always. He was a steady presence in all of this chaos. Security will clear the property in 15 minutes, he said, his tone neutral. I nodded, my heart still calm. I didn't need to say anything more. The papers had been signed. The venue was mine again, and I had made sure they knew it. Maya checked her phone, her fingers flying over the screen. "The video just hit 10 million views," she said with a grin. One of the top comments says, "That's not a mother, that's a queen." I laughed. A quiet, bitter sound. Let them laugh. We sat in silence for a moment, the night winding down around us. The guests were gone, the music had faded, and the building that had been my legacy was empty once again. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of everything fall away. This wasn't just about the venue. It wasn't even just about the wedding. It was about finally reclaiming what was mine, taking back my name, my dignity, and my place in this world. When Tyrone showed up the next day, I wasn't surprised. He was tired, disheveled, his eyes bloodshot from the chaos of the night before. He looked at me, his face filled with guilt and confusion. He still didn't understand what had happened. "I didn't know they sat you in the garage," he said quietly, sitting on the couch. "I didn't check when I got there. Sierra handled the logistics." My gaze didn't waver. "You didn't check, Tyrone. That's what hurts." He looked down, shame flooding his face. I could see it in his eyes. He had let me down. "I didn't want to make waves," he said, his voice cracking. I leaned forward, my heart heavy. "You let her erase me, and you didn't even notice." We were quiet for a while, and then I handed him a folder. "These are the receipts," I said softly, "for everything I paid for: catering, the venue, the florals. I didn't need reimbursement, but I want the record clear." His hands shook as he flipped through the papers, his face pale. "You really did all this?" he whispered. I nodded. "I did." I handed him another envelope. "This one's for you, too," I said. He opened it slowly. His eyes scanned the first page, and then they widened. "You're taking me out of the will," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I'm reallocating," I clarified. "The house, the property, the business assets, they're going to Maya." He stared at me, his face unreadable. "Maya." I nodded. "She saw me. She sat with me. She didn't flinch." Tyrone swallowed hard, his chest rising and falling. He nodded slowly, as though the truth was finally sinking in. "I understand." We sat in silence again, neither of us knowing what to say next. But the silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of quiet that comes after a storm. I had said what needed to be said, and now, it was over. "I understand." Tyrone stood up after a while, his eyes still carrying the weight of everything that had happened. "Can I still visit?" he asked quietly. I looked at him, the man I had once raised with so much love, and I said simply, "This is your home, Tyrone, but don't expect to leave the same man when you walk out." He gave me a small, sad smile. "I already haven't," he said, and walked out the door, leaving me standing in the silence that had settled between us. I watched him leave. The same son who had once promised me the world. But in the end, he couldn't protect me from the woman who had slowly erased me from his life. He didn't even notice when I had disappeared into the background. The following week, I didn't hear from him. No phone calls, no messages. The silence was almost comforting, though. It was a silence that had been a long time coming, a silence they thought would break me, but instead, it gave me space to rebuild myself. It was a quiet victory, but a victory nonetheless. And the world outside continued as usual. The kids played in the neighborhood. The sun rose and set, and life moved forward. But something in me had changed. I had finally stood up for myself, not with anger, not with a shout, but with my own quiet strength. I had reclaimed what was mine, what I had built. I didn't need their validation anymore. I didn't need their approval. I had fought for my name, my legacy, and in doing so, I had become the woman I was always meant to be. I sat by my window that morning, sipping my coffee as the sunlight filtered through the blinds. The world outside was peaceful, but inside, I felt light. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe freely. The phone rang. It was Maya. "Grandma," she said, her voice warm, "I've got something for us to work on." I smiled, feeling a shift inside me. The story wasn't over. I had turned the page. The past had been written, but the future, that was ours to create.